friends and enemies. I hope you had a good week so far. Mid-February already. This is Red Ice Radio. I'm Henrik Palmgren from Götaland in Sweden. It's good to have you with us, so thank you for tuning in. We have a roundtable queued up for you today on the Arthur Topham trial in Canada and surrounding issues that is transforming Canadian society into an immensely repressive environment, especially for white Canadians. Arthur Topham is here, together with Gilad Atzmon, both returning guests. I hope you've heard our previous shows with them, and do make sure that you do if you want to know a bit more about them. First-time guests who are with us today includes Paul From and Brian Ruhe. And due to connection problems and the time restraints, we tried to have Jason Erb with us for at least the beginning of the show, but we ended up adding on his addition at the end of the show as a closing wrap-up, so stay tuned for that. Now, all of these gentlemen are from Canada, and they can speak with some authority about what is happening there, as they are on the ground fighting this battle every day. Now, this is an extended segment, and we have opened up the entire program for free. We usually do the second hour for members, but now and then we make the entire show available for everybody. So if you like what we do and want to support the work so we can expand and continue to bring you shows like this, please consider signing up for a membership with us at redicemembers.com. We have over 1,000 shows available in the member section. We're coming up on 10 years here soon. So we have 10 years worth of material. This includes videos, inside episodes, films, and more. So do take a look. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get to it. All right, welcome everyone. We have another heavy-hitting roundtable show for you today on the topic of Canada, and also with some special attention to Arthur Topham, the trial, the case that he's been going through, that he's been fighting up in Canada. And I also wanted to spend some time on the free speech issue in Canada and also on the immigration issue, if there's time as well, in terms of pushing out the population that actually built Canada to what it is today and replacing it with a foreign one. This country, unfortunately, is well on its way to demographic and cultural suicide, it seems like. But we have with us here on the line Arthur Topham himself to talk a bit more about the trial. So welcome back, Arthur. Good to speak with you again.
Well, it's good to be back, Henrik. Thank you so much. A lot has gone down since the last time that we did talk. Of course, most people that have been following the trial know now that when it ended back in November 12th, I was found guilty on one charge and not guilty on a second charge. Of course, the odd thing was that both charges were the very same. I had been charged under that section 319.2 of the Canada's Criminal Code, which is what we call the hate propaganda section of the code itself. And
well, Arthur, let me bring the others on, and then I'll let you continue the story so we know, so our listeners know who we have with us here as well. So let me bring on Paul From. Hi, Paul. We haven't had you on the show before. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure, and it's a real pleasure to be on with other distinguished freedom fighters here in Canada. Canada may have a rosy image around the world as a kind of gentler, sort of a gentler, kinder place than the United States, and where Canadians are very polite and deferential. But make no mistake about it, Canada is a soft tyranny, and people like Arthur Topham have felt the full brunt of the police state. And just this very week, I was detained for 2.5 hours by the Canada Border Service Agency, or Canada Customs. They ransacked everything I had, even newspaper clippings, looking for hate propaganda.
Jeez.
Wow. They didn't get much, but it's a form of harassment, and that's what we have to put up with in Canada. So I say to our foreign friends, don't.
Yeah, looks like we're on hold with Paul. Let's see if we can connect with him in a second here. And I guess we can introduce the other gentleman in the meantime here. We have Gilad Atzmon with us as well, who of course took part in the trial. Good to have you back, Gilad.
I'm delighted to be on your show and to hear the voices of some new friends that I met in Canada 2 months ago. It's quite, it makes me nostalgic.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I hope we can. We have actually had I let our audience know here too. We've had a little bit of connection issues during the trying to connect with everybody. So I hope it I hope Skype gives us a good time here today because it seems a little bit dodgy as of right now. But anyway, back to the introduction. This is for funny when you have so many guests on. It takes like 10 minutes just to say hi to everybody. But we have Jason Erb with us as well, a returning guest. Thank you for coming back on, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Henrik. It's good to follow up with what I had talked about last time about Canada's identity crisis and then some of the current events that took place in 2014, last time I was on in November approximately. And it's good to be a part of the roundtable here and to broaden the discussion. And I had interviewed Arthur before, and I've heard about all the others on the panel, so it's good to be on here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And last but not least, we have Brian Ruhe joining us as well. I heard just actually late last night that you wanted to join in this group roundtable. So thank you so much for turning up on short notice, Brian.
Yeah, glad to be here, Henrik. And I've been listening to Red Ice Radio for years, so it's a real honor to be on.
Excellent.
And I've had a video with Arthur Topham as well on my Brian Ruhe show on YouTube.
All right, very good, very good. I think we're dropping the call to Paul here a little bit. It seems like we'll see if he can connect with us here to get his take on things as well. But let's go back actually to you, Arthur, and let you kind of continue the story a little bit, because obviously I wanted to let people know who haven't followed the trial and all that to kind of so they can get a summary of what actually has been going on to you. So if you can. Summarize, what's happened to you in the last year, and then we can get into the details and nitty gritty of it. But continue the story of what has happened to you, Arthur.
Well, okay. As I said, I was charged under this Section 319(2) back in May of 2012, and this case has been ongoing since then. And eventually, we got to trial on October 26th of last year. And that trial went on for like 14 days, and ending in November 12th, and with one. And I was charged 2 times, 2 separate charges. Both the same, and it was before a jury of 8 women and 4 men. And at the result was that at the end of it, I was found guilty of the first count and not guilty of the second count. Afterwards, the Crown tried to persuade the justice to restrict my abilities to continue publishing and so on until sentencing, and in their mind probably after sentencing, but that never worked. The judge basically said that I would be free to continue doing what I have been doing and until what is going to be the next stage, which is a charter or a constitutional challenge to the actual legislation itself, which is in the works now, and that's the stage we're at, and we can talk about that more later.
Absolutely, very good. And what else should people know about in terms of the trial, what it really was about, and the type of the judgment made against you, basically? What was the main issue about, if we go into that a little bit?
Well, the main issue was, the content of the materials, that were on my website, and in the majority of cases, they were not my own personal writings, but they were either online books or articles that were written by other journalists, writers, and so on, that I had displayed on my website, and that became the focus, of the Crown's position in trying to prove that what the information or what was in those articles and in those books, those online books, constituted, promoting hatred towards the Jewish people. But a lot of those books, and I shouldn't even say that, not a lot of them, all of the books, the online books that I had on my website, are available on numerous other websites around the world, including websites here in Canada. So it kind of became extremely challenging for them to somehow find me guilty when the information was, first of all, not something I had personally written, and secondly, it was available for Canadians to access through numerous other sites around the world. So that was kind of the basic problem that Crown faced. And then, and we can talk about this later, one of the books that was on my website, it was called Germany Must Perish. Well, I had written a parody of that book and just changed a couple of words around in it and called it, and then I made an article out of it and called it Israel Must Perish. And it was that particular satire or parody I did that Crown kind of focused in on and tried to use. And it appears they used it successfully in convincing the jury that it was that particular writing that constituted promoting hatred towards the Jewish people, and also they accused me through that of advocating genocide of the whole Jewish population, which of course is totally absurd.
Yeah, and do you think that they basically tried to make an example out of you, considering that, as you said, so many others had the same material on their websites or whatnot? They picked you for some reason, I guess.
Well, yes. I mean, they picked me a long time ago, Henrik. They picked me back in 2007, and it was the same organization, the Jewish lobby group here in Canada, known as B'nai B'rith Canada. You know, they originally charged me with a hate crime charge under the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Canadian Human Rights Act back in 2007 yet. So this case has been ongoing now for close to 9-10 years. And the original one, that legislation was repealed back in 2012. So they turned around, the same lobby group with the same spokespersons, turned around and charged me using the criminal code section 319.2 so that I wouldn't escape them, I suppose. And their objective, of course, has always been just to shut down my website.
This is an example that I think the world has to understand. Arthur has been persecuted now for the better part of 10 years, ever since he started concentrating on Zionism. And so there's a term in law, an abuse of process. What happens in Canada is an abuse by process. The human rights, he was with problems under the old Human Rights Act. That section was repealed, but that took up the better part of 4 years before that was finally disappeared. And as soon as they couldn't get him that way, they came after him with this criminal this charge under Section 319 of the Criminal Code. We have to keep remembering this is for the nonviolent expression of his political views. Nonviolent. He isn't advocating anybody commit a crime or anybody hurt anybody. He's expressing an opinion, and this is something I think that has to be thrown up in the face of the Canadian political establishment and people who live outside the country. You can do us an awfully big favor by phoning the Canadian Embassy or the Canadian Consulate in your country or city and asking them about Canada's repressive laws and asking them about throwing people in prison for their opinions. It'll make them uneasy. That's not the image they like to have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people in other parts of the world would assume that Canada is so, obsessed really as it seems to be with Zionism. And I always thought that Canada was very well represented up there when it came to free speech, kind of like Sweden and some of these other Western North European countries, right?
Although we have the image of being the goody two shoes of the world, we're into foreign aid and peacekeeping and all those soft power things, but don't kid yourself. There's a nasty side to the Canadian political establishment. Since under Jewish pressure, they brought in the hate law back in 1971. And that was meant to control to control people's expression, but more than that, to intimidate. There have not been a lot of charges under Section 319 over the years, but I talked to a lot of Canadians, and they have the sense that, well, I better not say that because there's a law against hate. Now, I don't quite know what it is, and I'm a little hazy, but I just better be careful. Well, that's exactly where they want you, scared.
Let's go over to you for a moment, Gilad, and tell us about your involvement in the trial and what you did.
What I did is a big question. I was brought as an expert on Jewish identity politics. I examined everything Arthur had to say about Jews, and I obviously found out that his criticism was focused on Jewish politics. He didn't criticize Jews as a race, as a biology. He hardly dealt with Judaism. And by the way, it is totally legitimate to question Judaism. I could see that everything he had to say or was charged with was referring to criticism and legitimate criticism of Jewish politics. Now, in order to understand this discourse or the issue in philosophical terms, we must understand what is Jewish power, what Jewish power stands for. I argue that Jewish power is the ability, the unique power to silence criticism of Jewish power. Now, this is exactly what we see in Canada. I don't know whether Canada is a free space or not. The only thing that I know for sure is that in Canada, you cannot raise questions regarding to Jewish power and Jewish politics. Now, these things usually achieved when Jewish hegemony is established. Now, I guess that if Arthur could prove that he is actually a Jew, he was then forgiven. And this suggests that in Canada, and by the way, this is a general statement. I guess that here in England or in the United States or in Sweden, in Norway, in France, if you are Jew, you get carte blanche to criticize Jews, which means that our legal system in the West is actually racially oriented.
Right, yeah.
All right? And now this is absurd because we are supposed to be anti-racist.
Yep. Yeah, it's true.
And I think that it is quite embarrassing. The verdict of the court or the jury was even more embarrassing because there were two. Arthur was charged with two. It was charged guilty and not guilty for two identical charges. The difference between them was based on time, which means that he was initially kind of calling for discrimination of the Jews, but then he was innocent of the same charge, which means that he actually became philo-Semitic as years went by. You know,
Right.
it is quite an absurd finding, and this whole case was uniquely lame. I really went. I was allowed to sit in the courtroom 2 days before my own testimony, and I learned the exhibits of the crown, and I really tried to address each of them. And there was not a single place where Arthur criticized Jews as a biology, as a race, and so on. Now, the issue is that some of the texts that were on his site were indeed very critical of the Jews and sometimes actually referred to biology. But the issue here for me as an intellectual, I believe that this is exactly the meaning of living in the West. The knowledge that I can wake up in the morning and search for something on the net and find it. This is the whole idea of living in a liberal, in a free society, that we can exchange ideas. We don't have to agree with everything. We don't have to agree with everyone, but we can discuss everything. You know,
Yep.
Apparently, the court in Canada or the legal system doesn't appreciate this freedom, definitely when it comes to the Jews. It's very embarrassing.
Well, Arthur, let me go back to you, and we'll switch over to Brian in a little bit, and I'll just let our audience know, too, that we've actually unfortunately dropped Jason. He had to go shortly anyway, but we're going to actually connect with him afterwards and get some of his points on all of this, going to give him an opportunity to listen to this. But anyway, Arthur, tell us, what counts you were charged on and then not charged on, and how these kind of contradict each other.
Well, there was only one charge, and that was promoting, hatred towards people of the Jewish ethnicity or religion, and that was constituted the first count, and what it was, and it was based, of course, on the two complaints that had been submitted, one by a representative of B'nai B'rith Canada, and also one by a non-Jewish person here in Canada who has basically been, is a sycophant of the Jewish lobby and has been working for them for numerous years. And of course, when the original Section 13 offense was being exploited for numbers of years, that individual was prominent in charging people here, there, and everywhere with hate crimes type of thing. So these two people laid separate complaints against me, and the first time it covered the material that was on my website from April 28th, 2011 until May 4th of 2012. And then a second charge was laid against me afterwards. And originally it was basically because when they charge you with a criminal offense like that, then Crown has the opportunity to introduce bail conditions. And the first time they wanted strict bail conditions, which they got when they first arrested me and put me in jail. They were able to keep me from going back on my website or publishing anything from May of that year, 2012, until November, and at which time they still couldn't get an indictment handed down, because here in British Columbia, and I believe across Canada in all the provinces, in order for a charge like this to be actually laid against you, it has to come from the Attorney General's office within the province that you're living in. So they hadn't gotten that indictment at that time, so I was released from those particular bail conditions, and I was able to go back online and resume publishing and this type of thing. So the second time that they charged me the same crime was again so that basically it was so that they could change my bail conditions again, because they were actually unsuccessful the first time. And as it has turned out now, they tried 3 different occasions to have my website shut down over this period of time since 2012. And in all 3 instances, the judges or justices who heard the evidence and so on and so forth refused to give them that privilege, and so I'm still able to publish online. But like say, the second, so all they did was go through my website from January 29th, 2013 until December 11th of 2013, and then they charged me a second time with the same crime.
Okay, I see. Yeah, it's interesting. So I also find it interesting that they simply didn't go, let's say, to your web host or something like that and complain to have it taken down, but they wanted to drag this out and do it more of a kind of a, turn it into a court issue and whatnot. And I feel it's kind of in the flavor of, what happened with Ernst Zundel and all that stuff. He was deported from the United States to Canada, and then from Canada, I think, to Germany or whatnot. It seems Canada is dragged into these kinds of topics, I guess. What do you know? What could you say about that, Paul? This seems to be a particular interest of Canada to be involved in these kinds of topics, right?
Yes, the censorship spirit has certainly seized much of the politically correct establishment. Yeah, I think you're wrong, though. They certainly tried to shut down Arthur's site independently of the legal action. Way back when he first started discussing Zionism critically, I think it was in 2007, one of the operatives of the Canadian the then Canadian Jewish Congress, a man by the name of Len Rudner, complained to his ISP and got him shut down. And Rudner turned out to be an expert witness. And, that's a bit of a laugh at the trial, because an expert's supposed to be objective. He wasn't objective. He was a player. Yeah. And he's a partisan. Anyway, Rudner admitted that he was instrumental in shutting, getting the ISP to bump Arthur. He said, well, we knew he'd get another one, but at least it would inconvenience him. I mean, it's just cold-blooded censorship. And then more recently, I think it was in 2012, once the charges had been laid under the Section 319 of the Criminal Code, the investigating policeman, Detective Constable Terry Wilson, admitted that he'd approached the Arthur's ISP in the United States and with the view of getting Arthur kicked off. And in fact, he was.
I see.
You see, this shows their bad faith. They weren't interested in removing one or two controversial remarks or something like that. They want him shut down. And I've seen that in human rights case after human rights case. It's not, well, this one expression is a little too far. If you just remove that, everything would be fine. No, they want him silenced.
Right. Yep, I see. Brian, let's bring you into this as well. Have you been observing this kind of from afar, or have you been involved in some way in this?
Well, I've been watching Arthur's case, but B'nai B'rith are after me as well. They got me fired from 5 teaching jobs here last year because they didn't like I have a lot of YouTube videos questioning the power of Jewish supremacy and revisionist history, World War II, so they got after me too.
Yeah, they did, didn't you? And you have a history in kind of like meditation and Buddhism and these kinds of things, and you were just dragged into this because of an interest. You wanted to investigate it further, and I guess that wasn't permitted, I guess, right?
Yeah, I've been teaching like Buddhism and meditation, the Thai tradition here for 19 years, and I've had like already about 400 YouTube videos on Buddhism and meditation. But beginning around 2013, I started talking more about revisionist history, and then since the summer of 2014, more specifically about Jewish power in the world. So this is something outside of my class. Like I wasn't discussing this in my classes. It was just on the internet. But I got in the press in August. The local newspaper here, the Georgia Straight, did a story on me on their website about me getting fired from Capilano University. And this came to attention of B'nai B'rith in Victoria. And then they actually left a post on the Georgia Straight website, and it states here, he wrote, I have written to the Vancouver Parks Board and have asked them to replace this unsavory fellow ASAP. So he admits publicly in writing that he's contacted the Parks Board, and then I was fired 2 weeks after that on another pretense. They didn't admit the real reason.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? Because, I mean, ultimately, what does personal opinion or interest has to do with anything connected to your job? Was that a part of your contract when you got the job that you couldn't talk about certain things, or what was
No, Capilano University, I was just teaching a mindfulness meditation course, and that course is actually on YouTube. I videoed that actual course the last day I taught there. It's just a typical, I've done this hundreds of times, so one day a sort of meditation workshop on mindfulness, nothing to do with my YouTube videos.
I'd like to just make a comment in case anybody thought Arthur was being evasive when he said an individual and another individual. It isn't that he couldn't remember the person's names or that he was being coy. He is under a court agreement not to mention his persecutors by name.
Certainly.
And one of these people is the man who went after Brian Roux.
Yeah.
And admitted, and I shouldn't say admitted, boasted that people like Roux should not be employed. They should basically be driven out of civil, respectable society. I mean, that is an absolutely Stalinist thing to say, that because you don't like Brian's views, he should not be able to earn.
Let's see if we can connect back with Paul here. But yeah, he's saying, they should go after your livelihood, your even ability to take care of yourself and survive, right? That's
what they did. Yeah.
Wow.
If you want, I can read the actual post he gave here. This is on September the 2nd. He said, he wrote, there are a number of professions that do not tolerate extreme conduct unbecoming in an employee, contractor, or practitioner, especially once it becomes public. Even if it was determined that Mr. Rue is mentally competent, it does not excuse his wild pronouncement against Jews, gays, or others, and certainly disqualifies him as a teacher in any capacity you care to name. I've written to the Vancouver Parks Board. I've asked them to replace this unsavory fellow ASAP. According to Rue's own postings, his Capilano teaching gig was discontinued soon after an important local Buddhist official complained to them too. Also worrying are his associations with the white supremacist leaders like Paul Fromm, who himself was disqualified from teaching in Ontario for neo-Nazi racial activism. He talks about this important local Buddhist official. It was another Jewish fellow with B'nai B'rith, who was also a Tibetan Buddhist Lama in the Vancouver area, and he opposed to me, and he's not really a very well-known teacher at all, so he's not a respected Buddhist authority. So that was his actual post he printed for the public.
Interesting. I don't know if you heard the rest of that, Paul, if there's anything more you wanted to add to that.
Yes, I did. I think what Brian is referring to, and what the Jewish lobbyist was referring to, was that back in 1997, after a 6-year campaign, the Canadian Jewish Congress and B'nai B'rith got me fired from my position as an English instructor in Ontario. A job I'd had for 25 years with numerous commendations, and my director of education said I was an exemplary teacher, etc. And it was entirely for the nonviolent expression of my views on immigration and free speech, made not on my own time off campus. It's just that in the expressions that Brian has just read, I think the Jewish lobby is becoming bolder. I mean, they don't even make any bones about it. He has bad views. Shove him to the edge of society.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Gilad, you spoke a bit about this, if in terms of what kind of trial it was and what kind of like information that actually was investigated, if you will, or brought to the table as evidence, and if it was okay for him to to question these kinds of things or whatnot. What more can you say about that in terms of kind of how in depth the trial was and what type of things that actually was discussed?
Let me be honest with you. The Crown arrived to this trial with tons of documents. It would take a PhD student probably around 2 to 3 years to look into all these documents and produce an educated reading of it. We were dealing with, how many were there? 12 juries or something that were not particularly interested in the topic. And I really try. It was very clear to me that the Crown lady, the prosecutor, really didn't understand herself the subject matter. This was totally obvious. I did my best to explain the clear dichotomy between Jews, the people, Judaism, the religion, and Jewishness, the ideology, in order to show the court that in the case of Arthur Topham, he never actually criticized Jews as a people. He never criticized Judaism as a religion, though sometimes he produce some legitimate or put on his website some text that may as well criticize the religion, which is legitimate. But most of his work was referring to Jewishness, to this ideology. Now, it is very clear that in Western societies, we are more than entitled to criticize any form of politics and any form of ideology. But apparently this is not the case when it comes to the Jews. Now, the way the Jewish politics works, Jews, and this is something that I explained to the court, in the case of the Jews, they create a kind of, they work very hard to make the differentiation between Jews, Judaism, and Jewishness as blur as they can. So once you are criticizing Jewish politics, they are offended as a race. If you are criticizing their racism, they are offended as a religious entity. And basically, we are dealing here with the kosher quantum mechanics. They are running, bouncing all the time. And the meaning of it is that they have developed a kind of an immune system that protect them from any form of criticism. Now, this is quite nice. This is quite nice. The only problem with it is that the Jewish state is a barbarian, evil entity, and we must produce criticism of this entity because it is murderous, it is killing indiscriminately civilians on a daily basis. Because of this immune system, we cannot really deal with Jewish banking.
Right.
There is no doubt that Goldman Sachs is now dominating the American election systems, donating to all parties, and we cannot even talk about it because some Jews would get offended as people, in spite of the fact that they have nothing to do with it. So we cannot talk about the credit crunch. We cannot talk about Israel. We cannot talk about immoral interventionist criminal wars that also were led or pushed by the same Jewish lobby. If there wasn't a problem with all these forms of Jewish politics and Jewish activities, I wouldn't be concerned. But apparently, we have a very serious problem, and we are spiraling down. And the only way to address these issues is to deal with these problems and to point at it, to call a spade, to try to identify what is it. Is it the Jewish people in general? I don't think that it is the Jewish people. You know, I have enough Jewish friends that got nothing to do with this problem. It is something that is unique to Jewish elite. It's a tribal mechanism. It's an exilic setting, and we must talk about it. And a person like Arthur, bless him, is one of the few brave people who is happy to take the risk and put those very important texts so we can all look into them and understand what we are up against.
Yeah, indeed. Exactly. Well, you're certainly have taken the hits here, Arthur. I mean, let's go back to the point in terms of the book cover. You know, Germany must perish, and then, you know, you replace that with Israel must perish. That obviously means then that if you're going after the nation, right, that actually means that they equate Israel with an ethnicity, with the concept of a race, right? Isn't that what happened there in a roundabout way then?
Yes, Henrik, in a roundabout way. There's been so many interpretations of that satire that I wrote, and some of them are partially correct. Some of them, of course, have been completely misinterpreted, as we see in the interpretation that the Jewish lobbyists want to place on it. But basically, in a nutshell, I wrote that satire simply to show that, if it's okay for the Jews, because Germany Must Perish was written by a Jewish writer back in 1941, if it's okay for the Jews to write a book advocating the genocide of the total German nation, German people, then why is it not permissible then to advocate the same thing, against the Jewish nation?
Mm-hmm.
Although that wasn't really, the point. The point was to show the hypocrisy
Yes.
of the present day state of Israel, the present condition of the political ideology that we know as Zionism, and to show the hypocrisy of those that entity and that ideology when it comes to freedom of speech, because they, are doing their damnedest, to stop everybody from talking about their behaviors, yet in turn, they have no problem with with having their own writers in the past, and not to say that they still don't do it today, writing hateful things or things that can be construed as hate against other people and other nations.
Well, exactly. And let's face it, I think, Germany, as far as I know, couldn't defend itself on this level internationally in the way that seems to occur in this case, right? I mean, why is this the concern of Canada? What does that mean if we have interests within Canada that are, more concerned, it seems, with to attack those who are questioning Israel? Why did this even happen in Canada, if you know what I mean?
Canada's just part of it because it's happening in every Western nation, and it has been since the end of the war, since they started vilifying Germany, and I'm sure Paul could probably add to that.
You with us, Paul?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Gila, do you want to jump in there quick?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think that this is, the case of Germany Must Perish is an astonishing case because one of the things that I told the court is that I'm an avid reader of every possible text that is related to Jewish identity, Jewish politics, and so on and so on. And in fact, I wasn't aware of Germany Must Perish before Arthur published it. So, to start with, this suggests that it's a very important. He's doing a very important job. Now, this was a very crucial text because the Germany Must Perish, because it led to a serious wave of hatred in Germany towards Jews, and there are different evidence that suggests that this is the case. I think that in Hamburg, when Jews were expelled from the city, they read to them some segments from this text and so on and so on. Now, what is more concerning is that the text that Arthur produced wasn't written by Arthur. Arthur didn't write Israel Must Perish. He took Germany Must Perish and he changed two words. I think that he changed Germany with Zionism, and this is very important. Arthur is very, very careful. Arthur hardly refers to Jews. He is always very cautious and referring his writing to Zionism. He's actually way more careful than myself.
So it's a political ideology. That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, because I actually insist that when we say Zionism, in most cases we actually mean something else. We refer to Jewish politics, and we shouldn't be afraid of referring to the J, because I think that Zionism, for instance, is just one part of the problem. Goldman Sachs, I don't know if they're Zionists.
Right.
No conservatives, I don't know if they're Zionists.
Yeah.
It is maybe, if they're Zionists, they definitely change the idea of promised land into a promised planet. All right. So I think that we should call a spade again. But anyway, what bothered me, it was definitely a satire. Arthur didn't write this satire. He just changed a few words in order to put him. And this is exactly the definition of a satire. A satire is an attempt to put in a mirror in front of you to allow you to self-reflect. And in Canada, you are charged for a satire. In most liberal countries, you cannot even be charged for a satire. If you prove that something is a satire, you won't be charged for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there is no maliciousness.
Right. Oh, exactly. And we've had, don't mean to veer off here in a different tangent, but we have actually had the same in Sweden. We've had artists who are very, have a very comedic approach, who've made fun of, racism and anti-racist and all this kind of stuff, and immigration and things, and they charge them in the same way. So this seems to be happening across the West.
You are right. You are right. Now this is a serious change and a serious. We are drifting away, and the best case probably is the case of our friend Dieudonné.
Right.
In France.
That's true. Yeah.
In France. Now, what this is there to make us think or understand that one of the symptoms of the Jewification, I don't say Judification, because we are not becoming religious Jews. We are just accepting one form of supremacy, Jewification of our Western planet, Western universe, Western discourse, is the clear fact that we are not very tolerant towards humor that is ridiculing some Jewish supremacist attitude, which is exactly what Dieudonné did, which is exactly what Arthur did in his text.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I just read this yesterday. It was the preface to the book "The Jewish Century" by Yuri Zleskin, if I pronounced that correctly. And he said this masterwork of interpretive history begins with the bold declaration: the modern age is the Jewish age, and we are all, to a varying degree, Jews. So that's.
By the way, I have a lot of respect to Zleskin for writing this book.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is something amazingly clever about it. It's the book, it's probably the only book ever that the Jews really, really loved. You know, they gave him many awards. The Jewish Booker Prize for his academic work. And funny enough, the same book is also admired by so many people who oppose Jewish power or even openly anti-Jewish. And this is very, very interesting. Now, you know that there is a story, it's obviously a joke, about two old Jews in a London bus. And one of them is reading Al Aram and the Strumer and like the most awful anti-Jewish papers. And his friend said, "Chaim, what are you doing? It's awful. Why do you read these anti-Semitic papers?" And Chaim tells him, "I love this paper. They say that we run the world. They say that we are the best bankers, And this is exactly that. Yuri Zleskin. The Jews loved it because the book said that they are really running the show, and for those who oppose Jewish power, this book definitely provided enough materials to suggest that this is indeed the case.
All right, well, Gila, just quickly here. Were they trying to, during the trial, were they trying to in any way kind of, I don't know, destroy your reputation, or that your addition as evidence or as an expert witness wasn't like good enough or anything like that?
By the way, maybe Arthur would correct me, but I was actually prepared for it, because this is what I would try to do. If I were the crown, the prosecution, but they, as far as I remember, and it took me by surprise, there was no such an attempt. Am I right, Arthur?
Yes. I think people, Henrik, this is a very small community that I live in, and the people, generally speaking, aren't up on any of these issues that were actually taking place in the courtroom, and they were quite awestruck. I believe not only the the jurors and the people in the gallery, but also the justice and the Crown prosecutor and everyone when Gilad began to speak on Jewish identity politics and so on. Everybody just kind of, their eyes and their mouth were sort of hanging open, and they just kind of listened, and they really didn't know how to respond to it afterwards. And when it even came to cross-examination by the Crown itself, she was kind of like sort of lost, and every question she asked Gilad, it was kind of, she was sort of probing to see whether she had the words right and she understood what she was even saying before she asked him. And of course, it was hilarious because every time she would ask him a question, expecting something affirmative in the way of a response, he would just usually start out by saying, "No, you got it wrong."
That's good.
But it was quite clear that she wasn't an expert, and quite there was something that should be mentioned. They obviously the Crown had their expert. What was his name?
The Crown? Rudner.
Rudner, yeah. It was quite hilarious because I witnessed Rudner's testimony, and the guy was actually reading everything from the text. So everything that he was asked was referring to the text. And what was quite amazing for us is that we received his expert report few days before the trial, and when we looked at it, we realized that it was actually written by someone else or in collaboration with someone else. And
Bernie Farber, yes.
Bernie Farber. It was uniquely embarrassing, and I thought that actually that there was enough there to provide evidence that he wasn't qualified to be a Crown expert. But I don't know if maybe something will still develop with it in the at a later stage. I don't know where it stands in.
Well, Arthur's lawyer, Barclay Johnson, actually, after that was revealed, moved for a mistrial. The judge said, well, it wasn't a fatal, sufficiently fatal error to terminate the trial, but I suspect, as they say, we haven't heard the last of that. That would I don't think I'm leaking strategy here. That would be among many other grounds for appeal.
Yeah, that's what I believe as well.
Yeah, what else should we know about the trial, gentlemen, in terms of, either what came out or if it was a farce? Arthur, just tell us a bit more about what's going to happen now. What's next in all of this?
Well, even before the trial commenced, Henrik, my defense had already tried to introduce a charter application, to have the whole thing thrown out, and we had met back in June of 2015 in Vancouver, where we were before the Justice Butler, who oversaw the trial itself, and we presented our arguments then, and then his decision afterwards was that he preferred that we wait until after the trial to find out whether or not I would be found innocent or guilty on the two charges, and in a sense, that may in the long term prove to be very fortuitous for not only myself, but possibly for all Canadians, because as a result of the one conviction, that now allows us, to go back and revisit the whole charter issue. And, had I been successful and had been found innocent, I wouldn't have been able to follow that route, and I couldn't have then challenged the actual legislation that's in Canada's criminal code. So now that I have been found guilty of one charge, that is the next stage, and that's what we're planning on doing, is to go now and argue that Section 319.2 of the Criminal Code is actually, it goes against Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees, the individual freedom of the press and freedom of expression and so on.
So you're following up on this and trying to basically take it further than maybe it had to go from the government's point of view. Is that correct?
Oh yes, it's already in the works.
Right.
We've been to court a few times, and now we have a date. We're still trying to set a date for when the actual charter arguments will take place, and it's been a slow process trying to get everything organized. But April 29th is when Crown and Defense are going to get together again and try to fix an actual date in order to hear that charter argument against that legislation. And if that's successful, then that'll wipe off the two convictions, and I'll be a free man. And then we can proceed from there. If not necessarily even myself, but anybody then could proceed to try to have that particular section of the criminal code repealed based on the fact that it was proven to be, to contravene our Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Now, if you lose in court, or if you're not able to do that, what is the threat of punishment here? Prison, fines? What are we looking at?
Well, the most horrendous thing that could happen would be I would receive the maximum penalty for that particular charge, which is 2 years in jail.
Oh boy!
But the chances, I think the chances of it going that far are pretty slim. But then again, you can never underestimate, what the courts and what those who are working behind the courts have in mind. If they really seriously wanted to scare the living daylights out of all Canadians, well, maybe they figured this would be their opportunity. And if I was to lose the charter arguments, then they, in the sentencing, which the sentencing right now is just kind of tagging along with the other issues that are currently in place here. But once the charter argument has been heard and a decision comes down, if I lose that, then the Crown will then issue their sentencing position. And if that includes jail or not, whatever, we won't know until that point in time. But when that sentencing comes down, then I still have the opportunity to appeal it. So, in other words, it could drag on still for quite some time before we know the ultimate end or ultimate result of it all.
In terms of what I mentioned before, abuse by process, the jury came down with its verdict on, I believe it was November the 12th. The date to set a date for the charter argument is now April 29th. That will have been nearly 5 months since. My guess, and from my experiences in the courts, is that we probably won't see the charter argument till the fall. This goes on, month after month, year after year. This really is an abuse by process. It puts a person through a grinder. Financial uncertainty about a future, and a good friend of mine, Brad Love, got 18 months in prison for under this Section 319 for writing nonviolent, non-threatening letters to politicians. So don't underestimate the possibility of jail time. Jail time for having a website. It's scandalous.
Wow, that's amazing. Brian, what does all of this say about the state of free speech and freedom of thought and opinion in Canada? I mean, where is this going to go overall? Because we're obviously thinking about Canada as a free, open society where there's tolerance of minority opinions that aren't represented and protected, such as other minorities and opinions are.
Well, I mean, I've often joked with Arthur that I could be next after Arthur. So Canada, we have this Bill C-51, which is trying to curtail our rights and do more surveillance on people. And the new Liberal government hasn't repealed it. In fact, our Liberal Prime Minister voted in favor of it during the previous administration. So it doesn't look good for Canada, you know. So I'm often wondering if I could be next, but I'm going to be strong.
Yeah, what is there any difference under Trudeau, the new Labour government? Is there anything that's going to change, do you guys think?
I don't know. And do you want to talk about that, Paul? I don't think the law has changed at all. He did vote in favor of Bill C-51. I think it's sort of two hands of the same monster, whether it's a Liberal Party or Conservative Party. I think it's all the same Jewish supremacist government.
I think you're right. Actually, he's not a Labour government. It's Liberal, but as George Wallace used to say, there isn't a dime's worth of difference.
Yeah.
I don't. If anything, in a strange way, some in the Conservative Party were more in favor of free speech when they repealed Section 319. That was the internet.
I think we might have lost you there, Paul. Let's see if we can reconnect. Does anybody know where where Paul's going with that?
I guess he's talking about the repealing. If Section 319 gets repealed, would there be more freedom of speech? But I think this bill they introduced, Bill C-51 last fall, it's probably more draconian. Like they could charge people for being a terrorist. If you criticize the state of Israel, you can be called a terrorist because the wording is vague. So almost anyone can be charged with terrorism just by what you say, based on this Bill C-51. But no one's actually been charged with it yet. So it hasn't been put to the test in the courts. So
they're trying to kind of set a precedence for this now so that they can kind of, enforce this upon other people on other websites and everything else, perhaps?
Yeah, so maybe after the Arthur Topham trial, they'll test the Bill C-51 on someone else, but it hasn't been put to the test yet, but it's been passed. Yeah.
It also could be that they're, just trying to cover their butts, in the event that they lose Section 319(2) out of the criminal code, at some point, because it's so revolting to most Canadians when they find out about it. This is, they always like to get something else in place, well ahead of time in case, I think they're very aware of public opinion, and they know, that people don't like, these types of anti-free speech laws and legislation. So they have, they could be trying to set, Bill C-51 could be setting up, something in its place in case of, even in my own case here, in case that the ultimate result could be, a repeal of that particular section.
Yeah, I agree. They're setting it up. In case that fails, they've got that as a backup. That's their strategy. I think I have the same assessment, yeah. And
you were asking, just before I kind of faded away there, that if it's different under the new Liberal government, I'd have to say could well be worse, because the Liberal Party in the House of Commons and to a man and woman in the Senate voted against the legislation that repealed the Section 13 of the old Canadian Human Rights Act. That was internet censorship. So the party itself are no pals of free speech. Don't confuse liberal with today with the old meaning of the term.
No. They can be worse in some cases with their speech codes and their political correctness and their hate speech enforcement and everything else there. Yeah, but it seems to be across the board, though, to be honest. I mean, as you guys said, there's really not that much difference. We know that Canada has been very aggressive when it comes to its foreign policy, for example, being part of the the neocon machine from America, basically. Is there, again, we're back to that, is there any difference with the Labour Party, their foreign policy in this case?
Well, the Liberal Party, the new government is less neocon in foreign policy than the Conservatives were. They were 110% pro-Israel. The Liberals are more in favor of foreign aid, humanitarian assistance, that type of thing. I don't think at the end of the day it'll make a huge amount of difference, but to be fair to them, that's where they're at.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, very interesting. Just another question. I was just curious, Gilad. I mean, when does the Crown actually pay for you to come to Canada and your accommodation and so forth, or is this on on Arthur's who wanted to have you there as a witness? What? I'm just curious. What happened with that?
No, I wasn't paid by the crown. I do believe that there was a donation that helped me to be brought there, but I was happy to do it voluntarily because I believe that it was a very important issue.
Well, it's very nice of you.
But people kind of look after me and took me to it. It was on top. This is something that I said in the beginning that I'm nostalgic about it. It was a lot of fun because I really met a lot of beautiful people, and this is something that I must mention. I was aware of radical press. I was aware of Arthur for many years. We communicated from time to time on emails and so on and so on. But I didn't meet the person, and I thought maybe there was a bit of a concern, because I'm kind of a musician and I'm not a politician, and I'm not even an activist. And I thought maybe I'm going to meet a kind of a very aggressive, radical person, and you come to these places and you meet people who are supposed to be right wing. There are some of them are right wing, and you meet the most beautiful people. Most humane, and when you argue with them, it is all driven by reason and analytic argument, and this is very different from the experience that I went through when I was actually working with different left organizations. There was time here in Britain that I was, I was the chief klezmer of of the SWP, the Socialist Worker Party. And when they wanted me to talk because they agreed with some of my ideas on Palestine. And when I told them once on stage, listen, I'm not a communist. I've never been one. I'm not a Marxist. I think that you get it wrong all the way through. The level of animosity in the audience,
Right.
they really wanted to burn. And it is very, very different when you meet people who are supposed to be kind of the outcast. It's
Right.
quite interesting.
Yep, exactly. That's how it is. Arthur, how has things been for you, I guess, more on a personal level throughout this? Have you and your wife struggled? Has it been difficult?
Well, it's definitely been a struggle. It's been probably, I would say, the biggest struggle from myself personally has just been, a financial struggle. After 10 years of constant, preoccupation with legal issues and, defending yourself and having to deal, with these charges, as opposed to, just carrying on and having a regular life and being able to have the time to, be self-employed in such a way that you can live comfortably, that type of thing. So that's been a challenge. And of course, my wife is not a political person at all. So it's been an extremely much more strenuous challenge for her, because she's got swept up in all of this over the last 10 years. So we're, and of course, when the trial came along, we were hopeful that would be the end of it back in 2015, and that 2016, would be a clean slate, and we could get on with, some of our dreams that we've been holding on to here and for quite some time. But that hasn't been my fate, and as a result, it also hasn't been my wife's fate, so, but we intend to, persevere here until we until it reaches some form of, conclusion, and hopefully a positive one.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I definitely wish that this goes, well for you, and that you're also managed, of course, to change as a consequence of this, of all your hard work and your dedication to fight this, that you managed to push things in a different direction for Canada, because I think it's important for the future of the nation and the people, and freedom of speech. So it feels like there's a lot, on stake here, at stake, basically, because this could kind of determine where things are going to go in the future. That's how I feel, anyway. I don't know. What about you, Arthur?
No, that's exactly how I feel and how I felt. I've been, unlike my good friend Gilad, I would have to say that I've been a political activist, since the 60s, when I first got involved in issues to do with social justice and so on. And at this stage of the game, in 2016, the issue itself of freedom of speech is vital, given our international and national sort of political situation around the world, where people are everywhere getting desperate, to find some kind of a solution to these problems that are just becoming insurmountable. And I think Paul kind of is more of an authority on what's going on here with this latest sort of immigration refugee crisis that's happening in Europe, and it's overflowing here into Canada and so on. But none of these issues will ever be resolved, at least not resolved, in a peaceful manner, without people having the freedom to try to address them verbally and intellectually, and and find solutions, rather than resorting to Plan B, which is not what any of us want to see.
Absolutely. I want to ask Paul about this in a second, but Brian, let's go over to you. Let us know what you're thinking about as we're talking about this, and what do you have to add to this?
Yeah, I'm thinking that the real problem is Jewish supremacy, Jewish power. So if we can't talk about the problem, I like to quote that Gilad says. He says, Jewish power has unique power to silence criticism of Jewish power. So as a fundamental thing is we have to be able to talk about it. And I know no one really has a term to refer to international Jews, Jewish supremacy, Jewish power, and there's no real term people have agreed upon, anywhere on how to refer to this without talking about just ethnic Jews or religious Jews. So it's difficult to getting the terminology right, but we have to be able to talk about it. Yeah.
Well, exactly, of course. Now, Paul, let's kind of touch upon that a little bit. There was another thing I wanted to talk about here in terms of Canada's demographic, suicide or the replacement, basically. I mean, the same thing is happening in Europe. Same thing is happening in America, more or less. It seems to be very driven in Western nations. What can you share with us in terms of what's happening in Canada in regards to that right now?
Well, we are looking at a period when there's a rapid development of a policy that first came in 1965, and that is the replacement of the European founding settler people of this country. It wouldn't be too obvious for the first decade, but since then, governments, liberal and conservative, have been united. In fact, all five political parties, there's no disagreement on the building of what they love to call today a diverse society, and the demographers tell us that if we continue high immigration as we have right now, 85% of it's from the third world, with a below replacement European birth rate here. The European founding settler people will be a minority by 2050 or a bit before. Now, this is agreed upon. This has never been discussed politically. Only the discussion, such as it is, about immigration might be.
Oh, I think we lost you there, Paul. We've had some connection issues with Paul for some reason. It's going back and forth. Let's see if we can reconnect with him. I definitely want to hear what he has to say there.
I came to the conclusion that I'm just like the Jewish diaspora. I just don't fade away. They all go away, and I stay all the time.
Yeah,
I keep disappearing. This is what Jewish survival qualities.
I think what Paul's talking about, though, is the 1965 immigration laws. It's changing Canada, United States, Europe, being all around the same time to bring in massive non-white, non-Christian immigration. And Kevin MacDonald writes about this in his book, Cultural Critique. The plan behind it, the Jewish lawyers since 1924 to 1965, they were pushing for this change, had this big change. So you can see the strategy, the plan behind that it's quite dark.
Well, is this dominated by Is this Jewish interest? Because obviously we know about Barbara Specter in Europe, we know about Gregory Gysi, we know about Noel Ignatieff, we know about Wesley Clark, for example. There's many proponents of the destruction of the ethnic, at least Western nations, that's driven by Jewish interests. It seems. Am I wrong there? Did you gentlemen have anything to say about that?
I think it's Jewish interests, yeah. And often they would have a Gentile front person in their organization to make it look like it's not a Jewish interest or Jewish organization.
But yes, I think I'm back.
Yes, go ahead, Paul.
This is a cold-blooded policy agreed upon in Canada by all political parties, even, ironically, the separatist Bloc Québécois. And it just is simply not discussed. And that's why we have such a drumbeat of sloganeering around this issue. For instance, diversity is our greatest strength. And Justin Trudeau was over at speaking to the World Economic Forum, the one percenters at Davos, Switzerland, and he told them that Canada was back, and we not only having resources, but we are natural resources, but we have diversity, and diversity is the engine of creativity. Well, that's a great slogan, and it's just total bullshit. Yep. If you look at the huge advances in science around the Industrial Revolution, much of it in the United Kingdom, Watt and Newton and Faraday and so on, that was not a diverse society. And the same in Canada. We've had a number of very important inventions: the telephone with Alexander Graham Bell, insulin with Doctors Banting and Best, and that was a time when Canada was basically mostly Anglo-Saxon, but certainly European, very, very little Oriental or Muslim or Middle East or anything like that. People are propagandized with this so that they won't think about the fact they've never been consulted. It's just a given. We're changing, and we're going to, we're just going to slowly end up as a minority. And nowhere on the political spectrum, at least the electoral spectrum, is that even discussed. And we are sleepwalking to our own suicide.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. The problem is there's no democratic dialogue about these major policy changes, like our immigration or whole demographics. There's no open discussion. And also, like Paul was saying, it's driven from the top down, like zero tolerance for racism. That you can't even discuss race. This goes back to Dr. Frank Spois in anthropology at Harvard University back in 1898. He changed our thinking about race, basically introducing a lie, saying that there is no such thing as race. It's just all cultural differences. But that's not true. So this has been part of our thinking and part of our science. You could call it Jewish science. And that's why it's not discussed.
Well, Brian, I always laugh at that. Race is just a social construct. There's no such thing as race. Yeah. Every minority knows what they are. People are not in any doubt that they're black. They form like the Jamaican Canadian Association. Native Indians have no doubt that what they are. They get all sorts of special privileges and benefits. They can hunt and fish basically with no regulations. If they live on a reservation, they don't pay tax. They're in no doubt as to what they are. But we have been fed a load of serious untruths. And what so bothers me is, and this has a lot to do with freedom of speech, is that we simply have never been given an opportunity to discuss this.
Yep. Or vote on it or anything.
Oh, heavens, no, or vote on it, no. And that's one of the reasons for these anti-free speech laws. In Canada, the discussion of, or at least the serious discussion of so-called hate laws occurred in 1965, and that was that was the year the immigration law changed, and incidentally, our old, very British European flag was replaced by the present kind of contradictory flag that looks like a logo for an insurance company.
Right.
Yeah, and the hate law it took another 6 years for it to come in, but the Canadian Jewish Congress had been lobbying for restrictions on free speech going back to the 30s.
I think we lost Paul again. Let's see if we return to her in a moment. I guess we can just continue with the conversation. But one of the things I wanted to mention is I think back in 2013, I guess it's towards the end of the year. This is before the major refugee crisis started to change and whatnot. But we've had a lot of organizations, specifically out of America, that was very adamant at promoting, reformed immigration or immigration reform. I remember we had, for example, let me see if I can find them. We had Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism. I think they actually managed to collect about 1,300 rabbis and a number of cantors as well to get together to kind of call on the U.S. Congress to ensure that they pass these kind of comprehensive immigration reforms. You also had the American Jewish Congress doing the same, and you even had outlets such as the Jewish Daily Forward that was talking at that time about how Jews need to unite behind the push for immigration reform. So, maybe you gentlemen can let us know what is their interest in changing demographics in other countries?
I could comment on that. I think because the Jews comprise about 2% of the American population, they don't want a large white majority. So if they could dilute it with any other ethnic group or any other race, then it gives Jews in the end more control of the society, since they're already controlling the society. So what they want to break up is any one large block. So the white Americans, they would want to bring a lot of immigration that's non-white to break that up.
Yes, that has been stated on a number of occasions that Jews feel more comfortable in a mixed, a very mixed society. They stand out less, and that's probably true. Even a relatively traditional Jew in a yarmulke or doesn't look that different from the rest of the European population when the next person is bagged from head to toe in burlap. It's a female, I guess, or somebody's wearing a turban, or they tend to look a little less different. And this may be a perfectly valid strategy for them. It's just that we, as the European founding settler people, at least of North America, we never get a chance to discuss what might be good survival strategies for us. We're not supposed to even think about things like that. We're supposed to dancing around like lunatics celebrating diversity.
Well, when you also talk about it and trying to observe the reality of what's happening, they put you down as some wacky conspiracy theorist or something, or that that
or racist.
It's of course, obviously, but just that it's not happening or it won't change. I think the immigration or the reform in 1965 in America, I think they had the idea that, well, don't worry, this is not going to change anything, etc. And we actually had a similar decision in Sweden just 10 years after that. In 1975, the government declared that Sweden is to be a multicultural nation, and again, we didn't have any say in this. So this must though create animosity, right? I mean, if this goes as far as it is right now, people they are starting to wonder. First of all, why is it happening? And second of all, why haven't we decided to chip in our 2 cents on this so we can have our say? And also, they're going to ask who is behind it, right? So this is going to create more animosity, I would figure.
Oh, I think you're right. That's one of the reasons they're so hysterical about these anti-free speech laws. I think they know darn well that there's going to be a reckoning, and and people will be very resentful when they realize that they've been duped. You're right. In the United States, the it was in fact the co-sponsor of the legislation was an old far leftist Jew from the Lower East Side, Emmanuel Seller, New York, and when that legislation was going through, a very young senator, Edward Kennedy, back in those days, was a strong sponsor of the legislation, and he was asked by a few perceptive old Southern senators, well, won't this change the demographic of the racial makeup of the United States? Oh, no, he said, there'll just be a few people coming. And well, mightn't this put Americans at a disadvantage in terms of jobs? Oh, no, there wouldn't be many people coming. Well, okay, well, you could always say, well, perhaps he meant well, and this policy kind of developed in a way he hadn't anticipated. But I don't buy that, because Kennedy remained in the Senate till he died a few years back, and to the very end, he supported this type of legislation, and he was a big supporter of amnesty for illegal immigrants. So he could see the radical changes in the United States, and he was quite happy with that. So I don't buy the kind of the Sonny Ways interpretation that, well, they changed the policy, but they kind of meant well, and they just didn't anticipate where it was going. Well, okay, if that were true, at any point along the way, they could say, well, okay, this wasn't what we intended, we're going to cut back. But no, they don't.
Yep, it's true. Now, it was what I find interesting too, of course, is when we talk about this and put it in perspective of history. We have today a very general view that it was bad that Europeans arrived on the North American continent because it caused so much problems. It replaced the people that was there. It brought disease and all these things, right? But it seems that in this case, when the European population is being replaced, then all of a sudden it's actually a good thing, and we as European people should actually celebrate this, right?
Yeah, that's the logic, I guess, because we've been conditioned with white guilt. They have a team of psychologists for decades programming us with white guilt, blaming us for all the Holocaust and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Let me switch over to Brian or Gilad here a little bit too, in terms of how you view this, if you have something to add into this in terms of what's happening. Arthur, let me just ask you about Canada and what do you see is happening there. Are you concerned for the future of the nation and the demographics and all that?
Yes, I'm concerned. I'm at this stage of the game. The numbers that are coming in relative, I suppose, to our physical geography and so on. We've been seeing the effects of it for example, I live a long ways away from any large urban centers, but I have over the last year been traveling to Vancouver, for example, quite a bit on other personal issues and so on, and I can see the demographic effects there, not so much from the Muslim perspective, and refugees coming in from the Middle East, but here in Vancouver and Richmond and those areas, we see the same thing happening with a major influx of people from the Orient, from China in particular, and you can see now the problems that are starting to arise, especially in municipalities like Richmond, where you're hard pressed to find a sign on the street, written in English rather than Chinese. So
really,
has been said numerous times already here in this discussion, none of these things were ever put to the Canadian people. There were never any referendums on who we wanted to be coming into the country. It was all, sort of a foregone conclusion by whatever government was in power, and all of the governments in power here in Canada, at least since the 60s and onwards, have been basically controlled by the Jewish lobbyists in many respects, and especially when it comes to foreign policy and immigration.
You've probably all seen these little snippets on Facebook, interviews with people to show how dumbed down people are. It really is tragic because the politicians say things increasingly that are unbelievable. You think they must have to wince with shame to just talk such nonsense. But what Arthur was saying about the huge Chinese presence in Vancouver, the Chinese money, much of it dirty money, has bid the housing market in Vancouver out of the range of the white working class, the white middle class, and all but the very richest of the wealthy. The average house starts at about 1.4 million.
Wow.
It's just totally out of the reach of any young couple that hasn't won the lottery, and yet the politicians play absolutely silly bugger. Well, no, we can't judge. We're not quite sure with them. We don't want to say it's Chinese money. Well, there isn't hard evidence. There is hard evidence. Any real estate person will tell you who's coming in with the big bucks. It isn't some country boy from Abbotsford. And yet they will try to blow smoke to obfuscate here. Even in an issue where who do they think they're fooling? It isn't money coming in from Greenland. It isn't money coming in from Burkina Faso. I mean.
Yeah, and it drives up the prices. There isn't room. There isn't enough real estate. We have the same problem in Sweden. The doors are wide open, and we can't take care of these people. I mean, they're staying in tents in some of them now during the cold winter times. It's just insanity.
Yeah, I'm a living example of that too in Vancouver. I'm just renting an apartment, and maybe I could have bought 20 years ago. It's too late for me now because just a one-bedroom condo, they have like $400,000 or $500,000 in Vancouver.
Oof! Wow. Yeah, it's crazy.
I think that when it comes to immigration, again, I'm not a politician. I'm myself an immigrant, unlike most of you. What is fascinating for me, and what I'm going to say is definitely not new to any of you, is that the clear discrepancy between the Jewish lobbying supporting immigration around the world, and on the other end, the fact that the Jewish state is the most anti-immigrant, performs the most anti-immigrant policies in Western world. Now. Yep. I think that this is the and I'm sure that you have heard this before. I think that the way to look at this issue is to understand that Jewish politics is different templates and ideologies that are there to fit with Jewish interests, and Jewish interests are different in different places. So, for instance, if we are living in Europe, in Britain or in Canada, Jews would probably like to use immigration in order to subside the indigenous community, to weaken the working class, and so on and so on and so on. By the way, on that front, they share the same interest with the left. As bizarre as it may sound, the left that is never overwhelmingly popular with the working class, which is almost an absurd, also see a potential in immigration in achieving the same thing, subsiding the working people, the working class, the working people, and so on and so on. While in Israel, they want to form a Jews-only state, and they are totally aggressive against immigration. When we understand that, the verdict is quite astonishing, and that there is no coherency or ideological or an ethical standpoint in Jewish ideology. Jewish politics is always doing what Jews believe that is good for the Jews. And as we can see, what is good for the Jews is changing from place to place.
Right, exactly. I mean, Israel, in some cases, they bases their immigration on DNA tests. They advocate. They're quite open about advocating of keeping it within their own group, if you will. And in other cases, there's stories about how they deport African migrants or even the Beta Israelis out of Ethiopia, I believe, actually back to Africa. In other cases, they have actually paid money to black Africans to, for example, fly up to Sweden and to seek asylum up there and stuff like that to get rid of them. So it's an incredible, double standard that we face with here, which I think most of you have, see through by this stage, and also are very angry with the fact that they push for one policy in their own country and then a very different one in our countries.
Now, there's something that I gave a talk in New York 2-3 days ago. I don't know if it was published 2-3 days ago. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. I hope that you will see it because it will be very interesting to talk to you about it. I believe that I've managed now to solve these issues to do with almost the algorithm that drives Jewish controlled opposition. And it's quite simple concept. Once Jews accept that something about them is becoming a problem, and this could be Palestine, it could be neoconservative wars, it could be banking, it could be media domination, it could be immigration. Once they accept that something about them annoys the Goyim or the Gentiles, they then invent immediately a satellite descent movement. So if it's Palestine...
Listen, Gilad, sorry to interrupt, but this is happening actually in Canada right now with the rebel media, with Ezra Levant and all this. He's like...
No. This is exactly what I'm referring to.
Okay, yeah.
So if it's Palestine, we have JVP. If it is media, we have Democracy Later. They call themselves Democracy Now.
Yeah.
If it is immigration, now that is now associated with the Jews. Here in Britain, we have Melanie Phillips that wrote Londonistan. In France, we have Finkelkraut, who used to be a lefty and now is totally anti-immigration. And we see it in Canada, we see it in the United States. Now, what happens then? And this is a very interesting. The fact that the Jews invent a descent hegemony debate is not the issue. What is so interesting is that when the Goyim, the Gentile, the host nation, sees that the Jews are handling the debate. So, for instance, that Palestine is a nice debate between JVP and the Zionist Federation, or let's say between Alan Dershowitz and Max Blumenthal. The Goyim move away. They say we don't have to get involved. The Jews are taking care of it. The same thing happens with immigration, with media. And last year we saw that even neocon wars, was reduced into an idiotic debate between two lame Zionists. One is Sam Harris, the other one is Noam Chomsky.
Yeah,
you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I argue, that on a long run, when you look at history and perspectives, and at a certain stage you realize that too many events, traumatic events, are Jewishly related, and this happens every 70 to 100 years. It's not something that happens every day. The Goyim, the Gentiles, the host nation is becoming more clever than the system, and this is when we encounter a Jewish disaster. This is exactly the rise of National Socialism. And I'm afraid to say that we are now getting to the point that a lot of people out there are willing to admit that something is not right.
Yeah.
For instance, you want to talk about immigration? A lot of people are willing to admit now that this idiotic war that was pushed by the Jewish lobby here in Britain, we were pushed into this idiotic criminal war in Iraq by Jewish lobby, by the Labor Friends of Israel, by Lord Levi, who was the chief fundraiser for Blair government. The same lobby was operating in America, similar people, similar tribes, similar ideology. We were pushed into this war. This war escalated into a global regional disaster. These are the millions of refugees. Now, Europe may take it on the refugees, which is quite embarrassing, but a lot of people in Europe start to see, why do we have this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And then you come back and you understand who brought it on ourselves. So maybe it's this crisis, maybe it's the next crisis, but it's not good news for the Jews.
Well, and you've had certain, attempts to deflect these things as well. I remember, I think it was last year, you had Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist. He was actually writing a piece in the New York Times, a column there about the piece was called Error and Lies, and was basically trying to pin the Iraq war on basically the white, the goyim within the GOP, basically, without mentioning some of the key players involved.
By the way, this is so interesting that you are saying it. I'm telling you something. I'm sure that you discussed it in your program. So if it's boring, just stop me. But it is clear to me that some Israelis and as well as Jewish historians, including Snyder, are arguing that the wave of immigration has actually a lot to do with global warming. Now, the argument is that the war in Syria. I'm not. Is it the first time you hear it? No, I'm sure.
I've heard it before. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not me making it up. Okay.
Right.
I promise. They argue that the war in Syria followed a serious 3-4 years drought and famine and so on and so on and so on. And why do they do it? Because this same discourse, they clearly understand that this entire disaster, this entire immigration disaster, can be used to blame the Jewish lobby, Jewish politics, Zionist politics, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So they're going out of their way to make it into an ecological disaster. We have to be very clever to understand who are the people who push these ideologies, why they do it, what is hidden behind it. Actually, I've never written, I didn't write anything about it yet, but maybe I should.
Well, it's interesting too, and I can pick up on that, Gilad, because another article actually out of the Wired magazine, it was back in 2013, it was written by Samuel Arbesman, and it was actually on this very issue. They were looking at the long data of European Jewish expulsions. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting piece. I'll link it up here in the show notes so people can go read it. But it was basically they were looking at expulsions in a 700-year period of European history, and they even had a map with markings all over that of where they had been expulsions, and from smaller city-states to just kingdoms and stuff like that. But so from 1100 to 1800s, tons of dots over this European map. But the author actually went down to blame global warming at the end of the article. So it's right in line with what you just brought up. No.
So this is now. I don't think that global warming in general is necessarily a Jewish discourse. This is it is a problematic discourse for many reasons. And I don't want to take side now, but I maybe it is a Jewish discourse, but I'm not so sure about it. I can point at many other interests, but at least now in the context of immigration, it is definitely 100% a Jewish discourse, and it's there to defy the accusation that it was the Jewish lobby that brought this disaster on all of us.
Interesting. Brian, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I agree with that. I like Gilad's surmise that they have a controlled opposition. People blame immigration on the Jews, so the Jews create the opposition. They think, okay, the Jews are taking care of it now, so we have to have our own opposition. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I'm going to try to bring Paul in here, but we are going to start rounding up here in a little bit. We've been going for a little bit over 2 hours now. We had some technical issues today as well, but let me see if I can get Paul back in here. But let's go back to Arthur again. We haven't heard from you in a while. Either if you have any comments on what we've been talking about so far, but if not, I do want to start hearing some of your kind of closing thoughts, Arthur, before we wrap up here. I mean, I want to go around the table later and give all the websites and stuff like that, but just in general, in terms of the discussion, what else do you think we should tie into all of this?
Well, Henrik, even before that, I just like to make one small comment on what Gilad had to say about global warming, and this is a general comment, but I think it's not that far fetched. I'm sure that the Jewish lobby is well aware of their success over the last 70 or 80 years in convincing the world, that 6 million Jews were gassed, by the Germans during the war, and they've pushed that so much now that it's kind of a difficult issue to address, but I think that they know with their control of the media, basically throughout all of the West, that if they were successful in pushing that myth, that I'm sure they feel comfortable in creating, another myth about how, immigration has something to do with global warming or whatever. It's all of that. Of course, I wasn't aware of that particular proposition up until now, but I find it quite interesting. But in terms of, what's going on with my case here and so on, I think, the outcome of the upcoming constitutional challenge to that legislation is going to be it's kind of a pivotal point, really, because again, without that freedom, to be able to carry on, a useful and an intelligent dialogue on these types of issues, whether it's got to do with what, the issue that Gilad just brought up. I'm sure 99.9% of Canadians have never heard of it or wouldn't be able to comprehend what was even going on there. But we have to have that open forum available to us on the internet, especially, where all of these issues can be brought up and discussed, just like we've been discussing them here over the last couple of hours. You don't see this in the mainstream media, of course, someone I forget who it was that mentioned, Ezra Levant's new initiative there, where he's trying to come in with and deal with these issues that are related to what Gilad said about immigration and global warming. These things are they're going to continue on like that, but we have to have the ability to be able to criticize Ezra Levant and his initiatives and so on.
Yep.
And all of them are connected up to the Jewish lobby. So it's an important issue that we retain our right to be able to speak freely here in Canada without being charged with these horrendous hate crimes.
It's interesting what you said there, Arthur. When Mark Lemire, he's basically the person who challenged the Internet censorship section of the Canadian Human Rights Act, Section 13. There were other victims, and I defended a number of them. But Mark seriously challenged it, and in the end, his battle, I think, led to the defeat, to the repeal. But as he was beginning to develop a bit of a following and so on, suddenly a couple of Jewish neocons came forward, Ezra Levant among them, and they I wouldn't say they hijacked the free speech battle, because I welcome anybody to support free speech. But they got a bucket load of media attention. If Ezra Levant said something, he would get publicity. If Mark Lemire said something, most of the time he couldn't get on radio or television or any notice in the press if he'd taken off all his clothes and run naked down Main Street.
Well, Paul, that's just because they want to. I mean, let's face it, that there is a kosher alternative that they want to have available so that discontent goes into a certain avenue. That's what I believe anyway.
Oh, yes, and that's why they, as far as I know, they have never touched Arthur. They've never supported him.
There was one story, though, to his credit. I believe Ezra did a section on it on the Rebel Media. I can't remember right now on the top of my head exactly what kind of the overall verdict was, but he did touch upon it. But I think that actually came after some criticism, Arthur. That, like,
I'm not sure if what you're referring to there, Henrik. If it wasn't the interview that he did with my former lawyer Douglas Christie after this was back in November of 2012, after the indictment first was handed out, he did interview him there on his television show, The Source. But although he was advocating free speech, he was also blatantly speaking to the nation as a whole, saying that he hated Arthur Topham and that he was so proud of the fact that he lived in a country where he could say stuff like that and get away with it, and vilified me throughout the interview with Mr. Christie. So all that showed me was that, the Jewish lobby wants freedom of speech so that they can continue on with, their vilification, whoever they like, because they have the monopoly on the media type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Now, let's go over to Paul for a moment. In a little bit here, we're going to start, wrapping up. So I want to give some closing thoughts on the discussion here, and then also I want to go around the table once more to give out websites and everything so people know where to go to read more of your work and all that stuff. But Paul, let us know while we have you on the line here now. Anything else you think we should add to the discussion? Some kind of closing thoughts here, basically.
Well, the most basic right in a free society is freedom of speech. If you don't have freedom of speech, you really don't have political freedoms. And one of the sad things is we had freedom of speech in Canada until our present Prime Minister's father, Pierre Trudeau, an old socialist, brought in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which sounds great. Charter of Rights and Freedoms, great, guaranteeing. It is the most hypocritical document you can imagine. It mentions all these nice freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. But Section 1A says you have all the freedoms in Section 2. In 1B. Subject only to such restrictions as are demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. And so basically the state can take away these rights, provided it's doing it for a good reason. We lost the Anglo-Saxon freedoms, and in fact, and what we got in its place was sort of Napoleonic law, where the state doles out a few privileges and limited freedoms to you. It's a scam, and it's probably going to take us a couple of generations to get rid of it. But that's our challenge, to get back the freedoms we once had.
Yeah, interesting. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, well, my closing thought is I think most Canadians are not in favor of multiculturalism, and they don't like diversity. This is something that's been pushed to us through the media from the top down. There's like no democratic discussion, no debate about it. It's just assumed. So people feel intimidated. They feel like they're going to be called a racist if they object to multiculturalism. So I think that this is something that was brought upon us by the Jewish supremacists running Canada.
Yeah, for sure. Gilad, how about you? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I go back to my initial thought. If Jewish power is the ability to silence criticism of Jewish power, all we have to do is, against all odds, to speak as much on Jewish power, to point on it every time we suspect that it is in play. And this is the remedy. This is the only remedy. This is the only thing that will annoy them and may save our planet. This is very simple.
And it proves their power, obviously, as well. Then, because then they can shut down what they claim doesn't exist, right? So
yeah, there is, I try always to present a humanist argument. If you are very naughty, I'm using a kind of a childish terminology for a change. If you are very naughty and I don't point it out to you, I cannot really accuse you of anything. If they do what they do and we keep silent because we don't want to offend anyone, we cannot really blame them for anything. It is our responsibility. By doing that, we will save our universe. We will save the world that we believe that must be sustained. And by doing that, we may also save them of themselves, which is something that they clearly cannot do.
Absolutely. Okay, very well. So I'd like to hear from each of you now, basically how people can either, get in touch to you and reach out or help out in some way, or simply just find more information about your work. So make sure to mention your website or whatever else you have upcoming or going on so that people can be engaged in that way. Let's begin with you, Arthur.
Well, in my case, all people have to do is go to radicalpress.com. And on the very home page on the top, there are a number of menus pointing to all the various issues to do with the court case. And right on the right-hand side in the column there is a subscription section, and also a place where you can go to the Go Get Funding site, which is the site that I've been using to get donations to help out in this battle. And any help in that respect would be gratefully, gratefully appreciated. And that's about it. I don't, other than that, one has to just, Google the names and so on for articles and issues.
Yeah, you bet. We'll obviously make sure to have your website up so that people can find it easy and follow along in what's going to happen next. Is there what else is upcoming now, and how far out is that, Arthur?
Well, we're legally here. What happened is just in the last week, I was able to finally get all of the transcripts from the trial itself. They cost $7,500, so that's an idea of the kind of money that I've had to raise up here, because the Crown wasn't interested in purchasing the transcripts, and neither was the Justice Department. So we required those transcripts in order to prepare for the upcoming charter issue and so on. That is now something that my lawyers and myself will be going through over the course of the next month or two, and then we're lining up expert witnesses to bring in for the charter challenge itself. So there's a lot of work to do between now and when we fix a date for the actual argument.
All right, very good. Radicalpress.com, that is the website. Paul, you with us? Let's get your information and details.
If people would like to write to me, it's really simple. Paul@paulfromm.com. PAUL@PAULFROMM.com. The Canadian Association for Free Expression's website is cafe, that's cafe.nfshost.com. So http://cafe, that's cafe.nfshost.com. We publish a monthly newsletter, the Free Speech Monitor, and we run meetings in many parts of Canada. So if you'd be interested in attending one of those or getting our newsletters, contact us either on the website or by emailing me.
All right. Gilad?
Yeah, my website is gilad.co.uk. I'm appearing on quite a few websites regularly, but this is the best place to follow my latest writing. When you get to the website, go for the magazine or thoughts, and you will find my writing. Otherwise, you can read about my music and my other activities, mainly as a musician.
Very good. Brian, let's wrap up with you here then.
Yeah, well, my main place is YouTube. I've got the Brian Root channel with about 700 YouTube videos, and about 200 or 100 applying Gilad's remedy of talking about Jewish power. I've got about 100 YouTube videos. I come out with a couple of new ones every week, and I interview other people. I have a Brian Root show on YouTube, interviewing people all over the world. So people can find me if you can spell my name, R-U-H-E. It's a German word for stillness and quiet, so it's Brian Root. And my website is brianrue.ca, and I do accept donations there because I'm becoming a full-time truth activist now that I've been fired from my Buddhist teaching job. So I'm enjoying this life. It's a good life, and it's a meaningful life.
Yeah, it sure is. There's if there's the place to be in our time, it's right here, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, you're absolutely right. All right, very good. I've enjoyed this very much. I want to thank you, all of you, for your time, and I apologize for some of the connection issues we've had today, but it's been great. I think it came out really good at the end. We're going to get Jason's thoughts probably closing on this as well, so we'll make sure to connect with him. But
and I want to thank you as well, man. You are doing an incredible job. You know, it's astonishing. Wherever I go around the world, and I travel a lot, everybody is aware of what you are doing. A lot of people following it. Beautiful, man.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, very good, Henrik.
Very much.
Thank you so much, Gilad. Really appreciate that. And again, to all of you, thank you so much for being here today. We'll have the websites up, and I hope our ladies and gentlemen listening will enjoy it. We'll wrap up there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, here we are with Jason Erb from FoCapitalist.com. It's the day after now, and we had some severe connection issues during the group call for some reason. He was also on top of it, pressed for time when everyone could join us in that window to do this program. So we're doing it this way instead. I wanted to give him a chance to add his addition to this, since I extended an invitation to him early on, throwing around some ideas for this, group conversation. So thanks for joining us today instead, Jason. I know you have a lot of things to say about the Topham trial as well.
Yeah, thanks, Henrik, for having me back on again. And I have a personal involvement with the Arthur Topham trial that had been primarily discussed on the show. Is that I had interviewed him then after the Ontario Civil Liberties Association had written in support of him, actually calling for the Attorney General of British Columbia, where he lives, the province there, one of the 10 provinces, to have a revocation of the charges against him on willfully promoting hatred. And right there, you see that there's the whole political aspect to it built right into the law then that was put in the early 1970s. And then since then, though, we had the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So you wonder, how could there even be this such a thing of limiting when you're supposedly willfully promoting hatred, but in this case with Arthur Topham not advocating any violence, because there are already the restrictions in the criminal code against advocating violence to varying extents, and that even to just go and call for it, not necessarily saying like killing this particular person, but none of that had taken place. But to me, that was a real odious thing, which I think the Ontario Civil Liberties Association rightly was one of the many things that they had an issue then with that particular law that in place. But the issue is that we improved our Constitution, in my opinion, and among others, in terms of it's been generally well received. Actually, that was one of the top things then that the Canadians valued the most when there was a poll done, I believe it was in 2014 around Canada Day, saying like, or it might have even been 2015, but what do you value the most? And right up at the top then was the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so I think it was surprising to me that then there was still this law in place that had been challenged, but then it was upheld without any change to the fundamentals of the law whatsoever, that your free speech could be violated. And I'm a big freedom of speech advocate personally for anything not involving calling for violence, with the one little exception of that if the government is completely despotic, as like mentioned in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and specifically like going after the government, that's a separate issue. But I personally have no interest whatsoever, and I'm not particularly going to fight against people who would be charged for advocating violence. But when it comes to the peaceful expression of political opinions, and that's exactly as Gilad Atzmon was talking about, that's all that Arthur Topham had done. He wasn't saying anything as it was about that the charge was against willfully promoting hatred of Jews, that he was definitely not saying anything about Jews as a people, saying in terms of that promoting hatred about them, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think he was willfully promoting hatred. It's a significant word that was added, willfully, because as I had heard about, then someone who had discussed this whole issue, actually a Jewish man himself, Ezra Levant, kind of described some of the details about this when he was on the Sun News Network. But the thing is that originally that they actually wanted to not have that clause there, and that would have been even far more dangerous to remove the distinction of willfully promoting hatred. Because willfully, for instance, you could potentially unwillfully be charged with promoting hatred just by being on the same radio broadcast, for instance, as someone who
Really?
is actually, in their case, maybe willfully promoting hatred, or not even, right, because they could still be charged in that case. But even just like guilt by association is something they could do. So
that means, sorry to interrupt, Jason. So that basically means that if we, well, that means basically even if a mainstream journalist, not even an alternative radio show or something like we are, but a mainstream journalist talks with, let's say, someone who advocates violence, they can end up in trouble. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would see that because, but even in that case, depending on the context, they could still get you. Like we looked with that old woman there in Germany who was questioning the official Holocaust narrative, and it was just suspicious to me how it seemed that it was a left wing television operation. Though I think they either had a guarantee beforehand, or they intentionally set it up that they would not be charged. But in that particular case, like it seems to me that they would have been open to the same charges as her, because you're producing the show. It's the same thing as like a mafia boss calling a hit on someone. That they're guilty of murder, right? Like I don't agree with the particular law that are in place, because it's even worse than the case in Canada, that they're even like just questioning a historical event in
Mm-hmm.
18 European countries, as you well know, is against the law. But see, that just to paint the context then of things, is that in Canada, what we did have was that with Ernst Zundel there, and I had just researched more of that recently, but it was really outrageous in terms of what took place there, because he was charged before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms had been tested, though. But he was charged with spreading false news, which to me, how is it news when you're actually writing a book about a historical event? That right there is completely abusing the terminology. And second of all, it was a politically motivated charge against them. And I thought we were supposed to be against that. In Canada is held up as this great bastion of freedom of expression, and well, not to the extent in the way of the U.S., but in terms of that it's viewed that the government does not go after people in the same way that the U.S. government has gone after certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
that was a political thing. And I was actually listening to your interview with Jim Rizzoli there, and that was very significant about how he organically woke up to a hypocrisy of the system. And it's a similar thing that you had in Canada, but related to Ernst Zundel, where he was saying about how that there was a problem with illegal immigration where he was living in Massachusetts. So this was against the law. So how could they, if you're just expressing issues about that, how can they go and smear you?
Right.
Well, they have an agenda to go. And then because at the same time he was hearing in the news that Ernst Zundel, who had went to the U.S. because he was about to be charged under some hate provisions that were not criminal, though, but because he got off on, this was after he got off on the criminal charges, but then they went after him in a quasi thing where they could only have fines against them, but it was still very serious if you're known as some hate promoter. And yeah, because they were trying to extradite him from the U.S. So Jim Rizzoli, organically, woke up to, hey, there's a hypocrisy here. Is how come some guy who actually didn't break any laws in the United States is being deported from Canada, and actually even wasn't breaking any criminal laws in Canada?
Yeah. How
is he being deported from the U.S. to Germany when he was a permanent resident in Canada? He was not a citizen. They had already denied that, again, for political reasons. So to me, this is not the Canada that I was told about. And so this is something personally that I would like to rectify with my involvement in this issue, beyond just being a big believer in peaceful freedom of expression.
Yeah, exactly. Now, beyond that, you followed the trial closely, I guess. Overall, what did you think about the trial? Was it, I think they actually gave Gilad some some room to to present some material though, which was good, I guess.
Yes, that was a significant thing that he did then, dividing up into three categories of talking about the Jewish people biologically, then about as a religion, Judaism, and then the third thing is about a political interest promotion group. And so that was the third thing that he said that Arthur Topham was doing, which is anything that I've looked at corresponded to what I've seen about that. And then, of course, we allow for discussion. I mean, especially in the alternative media, because in power of full corporate interests, that things can only be discussed in a limited way in the mass corporate media, obviously. But there's not this big uproar and political involvement if you're talking. Then they're not going to come after you with some sort of charge if you're talking about the NRA in the United States, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can talk about AIPAC, which doesn't get seriously discussed in the mass media in terms of how big of a lobby group that is, but they're not going to come after you in terms of some sort of hate charge or that. But then once you start talking about the Jewish pressure groups, and that's exactly what they've led out to be in certain cases, like in the U.S. with the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, where even people in some pro-Zionist publications are questioning, hey, how come, like commenters are saying, how come you're giving any credibility to the SPLC? Well, they have a over $200 million war chest, actually, if you look up their tax returns. So that's a big reason why people are going to talk about them. But this is the thing. People talk about these organizations or they question historical events. And that's when some of these organizations in Canada, formerly the Canadian Jewish Congress and B'nai B'rith, that's when some of their activists will go after you. And if they can't get you criminally, because that was the thing with the Zundel case, is that they did not actually go after him for willfully promoting hatred because he did clearly not do so. And then you look to Arthur Topham, like he had really hard-hitting articles in that about a small clique with the organized Jewish lobby and what some of them have done throughout the centuries. And that's really what there's a problem with. Now, I want to say, again, contextualize things that I fully support individuals on an ethnic, religious, whatever cultural basis, having specifically recognized like that they're openly promoting themselves as ethnic interest groups and religious interest groups. I'm all for fairness. And the thing is that if we can talk about white privilege, why can't we talk about Jewish privilege? Now, I don't actually buy into that. I regard both of them as false notions, because the privilege is something that's granted and can be taken away. That if Canada was 96% European white Canadian up until 1971, then I don't see how it's a case of white privilege any more than it'd be Chinese privilege for the Han Chinese who make up 90% in China.
That's
they
right.
Built the country.
Yep.
So contextualizing it, I fully support Jewish people, just any other group, openly organizing as such. And some groups are going to have more power than others for various different reasons. And a lot of it relating to their own individual, the work that they put into things and the networks that they make, completely valid in those cases. But then when it starts to get to be a threat to the overall society in terms of the restrictions then placed on the society that were our heritage, that distinguished us then from other societies, like Paul Fromm was talking about with the Napoleonic Code, that in Canada we're from originally the British Empire, so we have the British law, and the British law is based, common law is that you have all the rights, and the only things that are restricted is what is specifically restricted, versus that you only get the rights that we grant you, which is the Napoleonic thing. And this is what we've been trending to, and it goes against our complete culture here, and it goes against our overall interests, I would say, of exactly how we have been so prosperous is because of the rights that we have fought for, and this is the thing, is that these restrictions, again, put in the early 1970s, and as Ezra Levant told us on Sun News, that it was a group of left-wing Jews then who actually brought those laws in there after there was a commission on it, when they ginned up a fake threat by some bogus neo-Nazi groups in Canada that they actually helped organize.
Really? Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah,
well,
because
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one thing I want to mention about that, and please pick up. I don't want to derail you here, but what I think is sly too is that sometimes they use the ethnic kind of group card, if you will, say, well, this is an attack on us as a people. In other instances, it switches. It's a religion. If you can use more of that card, so to speak, then they use that. And to me, it seems like, if you bring to the table this idea that there is a either privilege within the group or the religion, if you want to go that route, or you say that their group has power or whatever, they use that power to shut you down at the same time as they claim that power doesn't exist, right? So there's immense contradiction within itself that I see constantly again and again.
Yes, and of course that talking about organized Jewish interests is really, I would say, it's the one thing that is the most verboten to discuss in public, and especially like on the airwaves and that, and just because of the the propaganda and the programming in people's mind, and a lot of it does go back to with the Holocaust and that, and
Yep.
this is something that is played into in a very bad way, which was even put out by Norman Finkelstein, who questions nothing of the official Holocaust narrative, but wrote the book about the Holocaust industry. So
Yeah.
luckily, we do have some Jews then who came out and are actually challenging then, where I think things have gone off track in terms of that, not even being able to sanely and seriously discuss Jewish power, because it is a serious issue when you have a very small minority of people that have a lot of power. I can understand when there's the talk about white privilege. I think it's a disingenuous, intellectual, dishonest point, but it gets to the point of, yeah, of course, there are white people, quote unquote, have a lot of power in the world, over relatively speaking. But then you look at, there's a clique among so-called white people who don't even regard themselves as white. But on the other hand, with the Jewish people, they very much do view themselves as Jewish. And like you were talking about, the whole, I mean, that's the smart thing to do, to use whatever you can to get what you want. If it's 1 minute you're saying it's a religion, and then another minute you're saying it's an ethnic group, because it can be used either way to the benefit. And so this is the thing. First of all, we talk about it. So I'm glad that you've been talking more about these issues, especially since last summer of 2014, when it was a big way that I know you have started discussing these issues. And
yeah, had to head right into it because I think a lot of hinges on this too. And what I find interesting here is that the default thinking within this is basically that if you begin to question this, or if you anyway suggest this, right, the default position is this will lead to concentration camps and gas chambers, right? I mean, more or less. But the default position is that, well, you can't also question this thing is because we know what happened there. It's kind of like a catch-22 where you can't get into this impenetrable subject issue, basically, because they all claim it leads to this, but then according to other research, well, it didn't happen that way, it didn't transpire like that, there's exaggerations, there are all these kinds of assumptions and everything. And the problem I have with it is that we just can't discuss it openly. We just don't have the wiggle room to even historically look into it, which is, of course, suspicious in my opinion, frankly.
Yeah, and I mean, even I felt the pressure, like overall, not from you, but with my first Red Ice appearance, where I was talking about economics, and then because I don't want to like not talk about certain issues that are relevant, but I just mentioned about how historically, like within Europe, then there was the issue of, though I mostly put the focus on the monarchs in Europe, then, who would take advantage of the fact that Jews could lend money, and then that the Christian majority would resent that, and then they could be used to kick out mostly the regular Jews, except for some of the higher level ones, or even all of them at various times throughout history. But because if you can't openly discuss that, you can't talk about like the historical patterns that existed at the time. But then, not to take away from the Jewish elites too, who are participating in that, who were like equally blameworthy. But the fact is, like, I at the time just felt the pressure of that, not to delve too much into it, because of exactly how some groups, and not just Jewish groups. The big thing that Ricardo Duchesne, for instance, like woke me up to was the cultural Marxist aspect of it, which of some of the top ones historically and now are Jewish, but that's like a separate entity as well to take into account, where they'll just, of course, it's not in their interest to talk about organized Jewish power. So you talk about that, and they'll be all over you on various things. But just to get back to with the trial, though, some of the things that I see is egregious with it is that how could Arthur Topham be considered to be willfully promoting hatred against the Jewish people or the Jewish religion when, as he has admitted, and surprisingly, when I first heard, is that his wife is Jewish, and by official Israeli law, which only goes by the Orthodox law, which is supposedly the most authentic, that his children are also Jewish, according to that.
Yep.
That right there kills it to me right there, unless he is actually calling for violence. That, if I was on the jury, I would say right there, unless you can show that he's really testing the waters and really trying to stir stuff up with his language, it can be obvious in that case. He's talking in a very sane manner. Like, I would not have interviewed him if he, as I said when I interviewed him, I said I would have not interviewed you if I saw like you were some like neo-Nazi, like a phony controlled opposition one, or a serious one, quote unquote Nazi, right? Like the way that it's portrayed in Hollywood, that I would not, absolutely not have interviewed him. But then I saw like how soberly he was discussing it. So I don't see how he could be promoting hatred when his own wife and children, at least, even if, sometimes you have disagreements with your spouse, but your own children, it's your own flesh and blood in that case. I that would stop me from convicting him right there. And then the other thing is that, as was discussed on the panel, that with the Israel Must Perish book that he did as a satire of Germany Must Perish, that it came out that actually the constable then who went and arrested him, actually during the interviews, the notes are all there, that he actually thought that was real, that Arthur Topham was literally calling for the genocide of Jewish people in Israel.
Right. Well, that's as I expressed too. It's amazing how many times that happened. That there's a lack of a basic, I guess, width in terms of intellectual capacity of perceiving that you're doing something like that to show an example of, for example, a double standard, or to show how outrageous it is when you take the word and replace it with something else, right? Or even if it's comedy or humor, it's remarkable how lacking that capacity is by these official people and people in power, if you will.
Yes, well, just to mention an example that I don't know the title offhand, but there's a case where it was said to be satire, but there's some people, like, I haven't made my mind up about it. I tend to think it probably is satire, but where some gay man was writing in a publication, like basically saying about getting rid of heterosexual people. And I mean, on the face, it would seem obvious that it's satire, right? But that's the case. Was that guy charged? Of course he wasn't.
Yeah.
But then in this case, this is the thing. Everyone knows when they've looked into it a bit. It's the one unsaid thing is that you talk about Jews, you talk about Jewish people, and this is where all sorts of complaints and problems are going to happen for you.
Yeah. As I think it was Sam Dixon who said, it's a third rail. Touch it and you die. That's really what it is, right? So you kind of covered this already in terms of freedom of speech and censorship and where this is going in Canada. Any additions you want to make there?
Well, I just want to say that I'm glad then that will be proceeding with the constitutional challenge. And I want to commend the judge. He's supposed to be impartial, but in terms of that, it was the jury that made this decision. I think that was the right thing for Arthur to go with the jury, although there is that whole emotional and programming thing. He actually may have got acquitted, I unfortunately think, there if it would have been the judge. But I think it was better for him to go with the jury. But the thing is, commending the judge for not agreeing to any of these really harsh bail conditions where they wanted to stop him from publishing and from making any appearance anywhere whatsoever. So I think the judge is, I don't have any evidence of him being biased in some obvious way, and I think that's really great. And so it looks like it's going to be heading in terms of a constitutional challenge. My prediction is they're not going to scrap it entirely, because there's the Keegster case that came out in 1990, and that was where the Alberta teacher who that was questioning the Holocaust but said certain things about Jews. And I could see exactly how he lost his teaching job, but I think it was outrageous that he was criminally charged because, again, he was not calling for any violence. And but there was that case where that basically set the precedent after the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came into place, where it's saying, yep, his freedom of speech was violated, but it was a reasonable violation that we're allowing to take place. So I would be shocked if they totally struck it down. But I would like to see some very explicit limitations, as they have done in other particular cases, set certain tests in place, at least as a pragmatic thing, that this absolutely has to be reined in there. So that's a hopeful thing. And, people can donate to Arthur Topham, as he mentioned, through his Go Get funding site, but through radicalpress.com to get the details of where to donate with him. And I was very pleased the way that over 1,400 people, along with myself, signed the petition to have his charges retracted in the first place. That was great to see an organic outpouring of Canadians who were concerned, at the very least, about peaceful freedom of expression. And so I think it's a positive move forward here. I think that the judge is looks to be looking at this situation very soberly. And I'm not sure then, I guess it would probably be the judge then that would totally decide about the constitutionality of it. And I really hope that ultimately it has some restrictions. But to talk about a little bit of political engineering here, just to go back to the Section 13 human rights, where this is amazing, is that it was brought in by a small Jewish organized group there to basically stop anyone from questioning their power, though there were legitimate concerns there if there actually really were quote unquote Nazis out there, or anyone who was doing violence against the Jewish people. Absolutely, but that should be the focus for any group. It shouldn't just be about the concerns of a specific group. But the thing is that because some Muslims went and challenged that provision and took some Jewish or pro-Zionist people to court on that, the Harper radical Zionist government went and turfed that legislation in 2012, and that was a great outcome. So, one engineering thing that I just thought of is that it would be really great if people actually pushed, or if the judge eventually decided, no, this is inappropriate to have political interference or sign off on these charges, get rid of it and let the police make the decision. And either way, I think it would work either way, is that you would either get almost no charges, except for those rare cases where there really is a willful promotion of hatred, as was not the case in Topham's case, or they would have so many charges that it would wake people up. And I think that would be the best outcome of any limitation, or if people would sign a petition to do that. I think that would be a great subsequent political engineering to whittle away these unconstitutional and against the whole spirit of our founding culture here.
Are you encouraged that the follow-up here, the continuation, will go in a positive direction, or will they try to shut this down as they do?
Well, there's been little media coverage about this outside of the alternative media. And even within the alternative media, there hasn't been necessarily too much coverage about it being a Canadian issue. That's typical. So thanks very much for giving this international audience here at least twice specifically about this case. And
of course, it's really important. And as I said in the interview too, I think it has kind of it has inclinations of kind of with what happened with Ernst Zundel and stuff like that. So it's a lot of prominent cases that have developed into international ones have kind of had Canada involved in it in this way. So yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, and I think it's going to move forward positively. And the thing is, but with the media relative blackout, that what was laughable when I interviewed them in I think it was 2015 or maybe near the end of 2014. But what happened was that you would Google his name, and a National Post article, which is the rabidly pro-Zionist thing, you'll find more articles on Hitler and Nazis on there than you will on all the other major newspapers combined. So that just right there shows who's behind that operation, not the least of which looking into the particular names of it, which is fine, but I don't agree with them promoting themselves as some great national newspaper in the interests of everyone. So I should have the freedom to question that. But I think that that was the only article that I could see of when he was originally charged there with the crime. But now the CBC came out with a little article from their British Columbia bureau, but I think they're pretty much going to keep it quiet. I was a little surprised that they didn't have more things on there trumpeting when he was charged. But again, it would wake too many people up they don't want to give promotion to his website though. That's the thing, because he has a lot of good information on there.
Yeah.
Not everything do I agree with, but for someone, if you want to dive right into the deep end in a good way to like get a full dosage of things that you have not been exposed to, his site is great. So I think that the best thing that will be happening is if there is more media coverage, but I think they're going to wait this out and ultimately see what happens before they go and charge anyone else for the nonviolent expression challenging organized Jewish interests. So I think we're going to have to stay tuned here for a couple more years at least, and unless someone really sticks their neck out there. And, again, possible political engineering. If there's someone who almost wants to commit like suicide or something, could like really stick their neck out and start doing certain things. But I mean, ultimately, aside from their temporary discomfort, that would, I think, be beneficial in just raising more attention to how bogus that these laws are.
Yeah, exactly. Now, somewhat of a maybe separate issue, but I wanted to get your take on this idea too of some of the outlets that have been popping up and to a certain degree kind of adopting, really, a alternative media type of rhetoric and attitudes, although not going the full extent. You mentioned, for example, the National Post in Canada, but you have Ezra Levant's The Rebel Media. You have Truth Revolt in the US with Ben Shapiro. You have, even Breitbart to a certain degree. They have a lot of good stuff on there. I have to say they do cover a lot of issues that the mainstream doesn't. However, on certain other issues, they fall incredibly short. And I can't help to think that these outlets have observed the success of alternative media, alternative press, and also at the same time kind of try to jump in there and somewhat steering it in a different direction. I don't know if that's intentional, if it just happens to be, and they're just fulfilling their own interest or whatever. But any comments on that in terms of not controlled opposition? That's not what I mean. But it's a media endeavor that seems to claim that it's all for truth and kind of almost an alternative perspective, but certainly excludes certain topics that I think the real alternative media hasn't been that afraid of shying away from. What do you think?
Yeah, well, with the one guy you mentioned, Ben Shapiro, I think he's totally above board. Actually, I heard the interview that Lana had done with him, and he was talking about with some being conservative Orthodox Jew himself. Like he was painting as a case of liberal Jews doing this particular thing. So I think he's totally above board. But this gets to the whole issue. I could just go down a list of so many things. Even myself, I'm biased on certain issues, and that we're biased based on our race, ethnicity, sort of thing. A bias just means a deviation away from what supposedly would be objective, which is an impossible thing to measure in the particular case of like commentary on issues. Like that's why things like mathematics are really great. But I think absolutely that it's funny. There was the like Hillary talking about that. We need to have gatekeepers. Basically paraphrasing her, but essentially we do not have the gatekeepers that we have like in the alternative media. Well, I'm sure that they had like plenty of gatekeepers at the time, but it was true to an extent of that things were like moving faster than that they were able to initially keep up with. And that's the thing is, no, even I wouldn't in this case be talking about controlled opposition, but absolutely people are gatekeepers by with their own nature of their biases that are in place. But a big thing is like, of course, money is of course the big thing. Is that it was actually discussed about a writer for Heather Malik. Then just her name was talking about Seymour Hersh, where like of course his whole Bin Laden thing. I find that to be suspicious to say the least. The way he was, I think that whole thing was a limited hangout. But the issue is she was just saying about how he said that he didn't know what happened on 9/11, but the thing was making the point that the corporate media just has no interest in going and talking about certain controversial issues. It's a lie that, the media loves controversy. Well, how come I can't get the AIDS scam discussed on even supposed big alternative things, that might have like several hundreds of thousands of listeners? just as something that doesn't even have to do with like quote unquote Jewish power. But the thing is, because of the sponsors, so this was being said here by someone in the mass media saying that this is a problem, is that because you have the corporate media right there on its face, is that they're not going to allow certain things. And of course, they're not going to allow like open discussion of even that these groups where they're going and persecuting people like Arthur Topham, and that where they have no right because they undermine themselves right from the beginning, where they could have charged them right away, and they didn't. They went with the easier thing, and then only once that was like jettisoned, well, we better get it now to get on top of this. And so the thing is with the alternative media, just to round it out, I think the big thing is the influence of money, and like people needing to make a living to preserve their image, and that to hold on to their job, and that's a big thing. Even aside from being some big paid person, that's the thing, is like, even to, where do you find the time to? It has to be driven by the people. That, yeah, you have these different things. I find it's a case of, appealing to conservative or liberal. But I think it's kind of inherent to the system. Like, we are tribal people, and people want to associate with. This is what I try to break out of, like in the comment sections of the national broadcaster in Canada, particularly, is like you just see people like portrayed as a partisan thing, and they think that if you're against the current government policy, that you're on the other side of the political spectrum, or you're with the other party. And so I think that's a big thing to get away from. But it has to be driven by the people, to recognize that you need a really representative media. And like I said, if the National Post has more articles than all the others combined on Hitler and the Nazis, like, they have a particular blind spot or limitation there, and you're not going to get the full story about certain issues from them. And you're also not going to get it from the Toronto Star, which is the biggest cultural Marxist group there. It's like mostly non-Jewish there, but it's a cultural Marxist thing. And then like with the Globe and Mail, like, they're more traditionally conservative, like the WASP type heritage that they have there. But again, because being a big corporate thing, they're not going to really discuss the issues. And absolutely, but you see actually some of the people who are on the supposed alternative things, they're actually getting invited onto the big networks, and that right there tells me that they're not a real alternative.
Right.
In the case of those commentators.
Well, exactly, and the fact that what I find interesting is that overlap, right? When there's actually very few from, let's call it the real alternative news or whatever. But there isn't that overlap there where these individuals get invited to mainstream television, get to talk about it. Maybe here and there in a few small cases that has happened, but usually it's like they bring someone on board who's like, oh, this man is, quote, controversial, unquote, or whatever, and they're given to us, the public, as kind of the as I said, the kosher alternative to go to, so that if you have, if you're disconcerted with or concerned with where the mainstream media is going, here's your option, here's your viable kind of, well, as they say, the rebel that's going to break you away from all of this. While on the other hand, not touching on certain issues. I mean, I think we can safely say that the main narrative, whether it's these kind of faux alternative sources or if it's the mainstream, the main narrative is very much controlled, and there is a kind of agreed upon perspective which is accepted, and if you cross those boundaries, you're basically out, right? I mean, that's really it's very, as we say in Sweden, it's an opinion corridor. It's very narrow. And they just don't break outside of that, which I think is telling, right?
Yeah, just to share one little story, I was a big fan of Dr. Stan Monteith there, and he was like a really hardcore Christian Zionist, but he was a big defender of the heritage of the United States, and that's one of the things that I really admired. But he shared a story about how there was the radio host in San Francisco, Jim Eason. He was good friends with him, and when he was there in studio one time, that on air, Eason was saying that if they ever told me what to do, I would quit right away. And then what happened was during the break, well, actually, that was after what he told Dr. Stan Monteith during the break, was that during the break, he was saying, like, I can't really give my real opinions here. And so what was happened was when he went on the air and said that, like, I would quit right away if they told me what to say. And he winked at Dr. Stan Monteith. And like Dr. Stan Monteith said, he didn't hold it against Jim Eason saying he was a good guy. But that's a direct example of someone who worked in the industry for, I think, both of them over 3 decades. That actually, in the case of Dr. Stamateeth, 17 years, but Jim Eason over 30 years, I believe, that was in the mass media industry. And right there, that says it all. That's just one of the particular cases out there. They know that there are very limited parameters of what they can talk about, and he wasn't even getting into the details. But even far less things than talking about organized Jewish power.
Yep, exactly. That is verboten, as you just said. All right, well, thank you so much for your addition here, Jason. Much appreciated. Please give us your website and let us know if there's anything else you have going on.
Yeah, well, speaking about faux, it's fauxcapitalist.com, which is about what's portrayed as capitalism being a good thing. But actually, the good thing from my research is free enterprise. That's what the United States especially was really based on, that distinguished it. So I've been writing there ever since 2008. Of course, not coincidentally timed with the whole financial crisis there in the United States. And so I talk about a lot of political issues. I haven't done as much writing lately. I've been really busy with other things, but I have a radio show occasionally that I do about it at least once a month now. But you can see the details on my site, fauxcapitalist.com.
All right, very good. Well, Skype seems to have given us a break today, so thank you for that, Microsoft. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Henrik.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. As always, we hope you've learned something new and have some new intellectual ammunition in your arsenal and help to expose the utter double standards that is taking place not only in Canada, but in many countries founded and built by Europeans. We have some good shows coming up with Bob Whitaker and Tom Bowie about the 2016 presidential race in the U.S. We did an hour with Gerald Celente from Trends Research. We also are going to have a show with Sherry Tenpenny, John Rappaport, and Andreas Bachmeier on the Zika virus and the vaccination push. We have also an interview with Daniel Carlson from the Danes Party from Denmark, and many more after this. Well, thank you so much for listening today, and a special thanks to all our members for supporting what we do so that we can continue to bring you shows like this. If you want to sign up and get 10 years worth of alternative media coverage, go to redicemembers.com. It's only €6 per month. We have subscriptions from 3 months up to 2 years, and it gets cheaper per month the longer subscription you go for. Okay, we'll sign off for today. Thank you again. Please take care, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back with a Radio 314 on Friday. In the meantime, we'll see you on the websites. Have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you are.